dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
One of the most important things, never, ever quit. Never quit. One of the things about loving what you do is that it's not work, and therefore you don't quit automatically. It's a lot easier not to quit. But you can never give up.
It's harder than a lot of you thought it might be. Sometimes it may make you feel like that it's not possible. You might want to give up.
We believe in you.
Don't give up. I don't want you to feel discouraged. I want you to understand that it just means we got to push that much harder.
For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life.
So tonight, I wanted to cover two stories, but the first story is this Vladek Filler up in Maine. He was wrongfully convicted on multiple charges, and it was 100% because of prosecutorial misconduct. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a report that I did earlier today, but I'm going to monitor the comments, and if there's a good comment that comes in, I'm going to break in, and we'll talk about this, but I want to have a discussion about this Vladek Filler wrongful conviction. I think that this case is something that demands a lot of attention, because even though ultimately he did get the justice that he deserved, this sort of thing happens all the time in the state of Maine, and this is the one of the success stories of somebody who actually was able to fight back successfully. But there's a lot of people up in Maine that are dealing with the same things that he had to deal with. Anyway, let's watch this together, and I'm going to stay with the live stream the whole time, and as we start the conversation and people start commenting, I'll break in.
A federal lawsuit filed by a man cleared of sexually assaulting his wife in Hancock County has been settled with more than a dozen defendants for $375,000. Vladek Filler sued the county, police, the district attorney's office, and the lead prosecutor, Mary Kellett. His lawyer, Thomas Hallett, tells TV5 News, this is the first case where state prosecutors have paid to settle a suit involving prosecuting misconduct. A judge determined earlier this month all but one of the parties had reached agreements in the case. Filler's 2015 suit said he was denied a fair trial and was a victim of defamation and malicious prosecution. Filler was convicted of sexually assaulting his wife in 2009, but that was overturned 2 years later. A judge ruled evidence was left out of the trial and that Kellett made improper statements to the jury. Kellett eventually admitted she violated rules of the Maine bar and was disciplined. The case is expected to continue against a final defendant who's a friend of Filler's ex-wife.
Assault conviction vacated for former Maine man acquitted of raping wife. A misdemeanor assault conviction for a former Gouldsboro man who had been accused of raping his wife has been vacated by the Superior Court Justice. The judge's order is the latest development in Vladek Filler's campaign to undo the findings against him in an 8-year legal saga that has produced both convictions and acquittals on charges that he assaulted his then wife in Goldsboro in 2005 and in 2007. The legal battle also resulted for the first time in recent memory in a court-ordered sanction of a prosecutor in Maine. As a result of the simple assault conviction being vacated, Filler has a clean record and has been exonerated of all charges he faced in 2 separate trials over the allegations. Filler was found guilty in 1 gross sexual assault charge and 2 assault charges at his first trial in January 2009. And after those convictions were later thrown out, he was convicted in May 2011 of only the misdemeanor assault. But his legal battles are not over. Filler, who's 45, is suing more than a dozen people in federal court over the matter, most of whom are prosecutors or police officers who were directly or indirectly involved in the criminal case against him. Filler's attorney in the federal lawsuit, Thomas Hallett of Portland, said Friday that the lawsuit is still in its early stages and that so far there have been no substantive rulings in the case. Filler, who now lives in a suburban Atlanta with his two sons, said Friday in a brief emailed statement that he is glad to have been cleared of all the criminal allegations leveled by his ex-wife. He has maintained from the beginning that their marriage was unraveling in 2007 and that she fabricated the assault and rape accusations in an attempt to gain leverage in a looming custody battle over the boys. It has been a difficult 8-year nightmare for me and my family, Filler said in the email. I am very grateful to my attorney, Hunter Traveras, for his exceptional work, which exonerated me upon the court's review of the case. Zavarez of Bangor said Thursday that the primary argument in Filler's post-conviction review petition was that Filler never was provided with a copy of the Washington County Sheriff's Department police cruiser dashboard camera video of an April 24, 2007 interview with Filler's then wife. Before his first trial, Filler and his defense attorney at the time, Daniel Peligi of Ellsworth, had gone through normal court procedure to request a copy of the video from the assistant district attorney, Mary Kellett, who was prosecuting the case. The video, which Filler argued may have contained information that would have been helpful to his defense, later was destroyed without a copy ever being provided to him or his attorney. Collette, who since has gone into private practice, subsequently was sanctioned by the law court after Filler successfully filed a complaint against her with the Maine Board of Overseers of the bar over this and other discovery violations and over statements Collette made to the jury during his first trial. After holding a 2-day hearing, the board later determined Collette had violated rules of conduct that govern licensed attorneys in Maine and recommended that she be suspended. Collette, who is one of the defendants in Filler's federal lawsuit, was not suspended, but was required to undergo remediation training. Joshua Randall, one of Kellett's attorneys in the federal lawsuit, declined to comment Friday on any of Filler's legal cases. Zavarez said that current Hancock County District Attorney Matthew Foster, who was elected last fall and was not involved in Filler's prosecution, did not object to Filler's petition to vacate the assault conviction. Filler served 21 days in jail in October 2012 after being convicted of misdemeanor assault at his second trial. Justice Robert Murray, the presiding judge at Filler's second trial, ruled in favor of vacating the convictions on April 24, Traveras said. It's been extremely important to Filler to clear his name since the allegations came about 8+ years ago, Traveras said. He's been vindicated. Foster said Friday that he did not oppose Filler's conviction being vacated because Filler has served the sentence, and especially with the civil case pending in federal court, there has been enough legal wrangling over what has come down to a misdemeanor assault. Also, with Filler living in Georgia, Foster does not expect Filler to ever resurface in Maine's criminal justice system. I think this office has been through enough on this case, Foster said. I felt not opposing the petition was in the interest of getting it resolved. So they're not even saying that the police were wrong or that he didn't do it. They're just saying that they're just done with it. And they still think he's guilty, but they're not going to do anything about it.
A federal judge has awarded $2.1 million to a former Gouldsboro man cleared of sexually assaulting his ex-wife. The judge ruled Linda Gleason coached Filler's ex-wife in 2007 to build a false case against Filler. Last fall, Filler's federal lawsuit against more than a dozen other defendants was settled for $375,000. Those he sued include the county, police, the district attorney's office, and lead prosecutor Mary Kellett. Filler was convicted of sexually assaulting his wife in 2009, but that was overturned 2 years later. A judge ruled evidence was left out of the trial, and Kellett made improper statements to the jury.
Former Maine man wins $1.8 million after enduring a living nightmare in discredited rape case. There he is in the middle with the glasses on, the clear glasses. Nearly 12 years after his then wife accused him of rape and assault, a former Gouldsboro resident has been awarded nearly $1.77 million in damages against a friend of his ex-wife who testified against him at 2 trials. Vladek Filler eventually was exonerated of the allegations after being found innocent of all but one of the charges at 2 trials. A judge later vacated the simple assault conviction that resulted from his second trial, later without objection by the current Hancock County District Attorney Matthew Foster. Filler, who now lives in suburban Atlanta, has maintained throughout the saga that his ex-wife falsely accused him of raping and assaulting her as part of a child custody case that he later won. Filler was granted full custody of their 2 sons in their 2011 divorce. In 2015, Filler filed suit against more than a dozen people, most of them former public officials, alleging he was deprived of his rights and due process because of the way his case was handled. The civil lawsuit was settled last year for $375,000 with all but one of the defendants. On Tuesday, Judge John Woodcock issued an order in judgment in federal court in Bangor, awarding Filler $1.7 million in damages against Linda Gleason, the last remaining defendant in the civil lawsuit. Gleason is a registered nurse who, according to federal court documents, encouraged Filler's ex-wife to cry during a police interview about the alleged assault to make it seem real, quote unquote. Woodcock wrote in his order that Gleason was, quote, extremely culpable, end quote, in the way Filler's case was mishandled, and that she helped initiate the accusations of wrongdoing and supported and encouraged the false allegations throughout the course of the 2 trials. Quote, she has not come clean even to this day, end quote, the judge wrote. Quote, Miss Gleason did not merely set a ball in motion and watch it roll. She continued to push it, testifying falsely as a witness, adding to her credibility by calling on her professionalism as a nurse. She must have known that he had been wrongly convicted on 2 occasions, and yet she never told the truth, end quote. Contact information for Gleason, who now lives in Missouri, was unavailable Friday. According to federal court documents, Gleason is representing herself in the civil suit. Woodcock compared Filler's, quote, horrendous, end quote, experience with the criminal justice system in Maine to Franz Kafka's book, quote, The Trial, in which a man is arrested and prosecuted for reasons never made clear. The criminal justice system depends on honesty and objectivity, Woodcock said, but in Filler's case, the system failed. Mr. Filler endured a living nightmare, Woodcock wrote, falsely accused by his then wife and her friend of committing heinous crimes. He was wrongfully charged, tried and convicted on those charges, and it took him 8 years to be fully exonerated. Mr. Filler's experience is no one's idea of justice in this state or country. Woodcock wrote that a number of people involved in handling Filler's criminal case deliberately chose to do the wrong thing, and that if Gleason had been truthful, the state of Maine's case would have fallen on its own weight. As part of his calculations, Woodcock determined that Filler is entitled to more than $2 million in damages, but the judge subtracted the $375,000 Filler already has been awarded through his earlier settlement from the amount he ordered Gleason to pay. Filler said that Woodcock's decision is a profound watershed moment for me and my family, though he is not sure if he will find complete closure from the experience. The surreal nightmare my family and I were put through has been devastating, Filler said. From day one, and throughout both criminal trials, the truth was available to the officials involved, but they ignored and suppressed the truth and deliberately kept it from the eyes and ears of the jury. He said he feels some sense of vindication and is grateful to his attorneys and to Woodcock for helping bring the truth to light. I am disappointed, however, that the state and county officials have not held their employees accountable for all the egregious and inexcusable civil rights violations that were committed in my case, he said. The civil lawsuit was not the only formal complaint Filler filed over the now discredited criminal case against him. He also filed a complaint against former prosecutor Mary Collette with the Maine Board of Overseers of the Bar, which resulted in Collette becoming the first Maine prosecutor in recent memory to be publicly sanctioned by the state over prosecutorial misconduct. Collette, who now works in private practice as a defense attorney, prosecuted Filler at his first trial in 2009. Collette was among other people named as defendants in the civil lawsuit and who reached a settlement with him last year. The other defendants include Michael Povich and Carletta Bassano, former district attorneys for Hancock and Washington County, former Hancock County Sheriff and current Hancock County Commissioner William Clark, Paul Kavanaugh, an assistant district attorney who prosecuted Filler's second trial and who now works as a prosecutor in Kennebec County, several former or current law enforcement officers who were involved in the criminal investigation, the governmental entities of Hancock County, Washington County, the town of Goldsboro, and the city of Ellsworth, each of which had officers from their law enforcement divisions involved in the investigation against Filler, insurance companies for the governmental entities and their former and current employees covered the cost of the $375,000 settlement with Filler. So once again, we have corruption in the prosecutor's office, getting a wrong conviction on somebody based on not all the information, keeping the information from his defense attorney, pushing for a conviction even though the evidence did not warrant a conviction. This is all very similar to the Linda Doloff case because, again, we don't know if this guy's guilty or not guilty, but the evidence shows that he's not guilty. And the same in the Linda Doloff case. We don't know if she's guilty or not guilty, but there was so much reasonable doubt, and the evidence pointed to they shouldn't have moved forward with the prosecution. That's just what law enforcement and especially district attorneys and prosecutors are supposed to do. They're supposed to only move forward with cases that they are certain the person is guilty, not when there's tons of reasonable doubt or there's evidence showing the opposite is true, like in this case. I mean, but this is consistent with all the cases I've covered in Maine. There's civil rights violations, there's human rights violations, there's discovery violations, there's not giving all the evidence to, there's ignoring evidence, there's misapplying the law, there's prosecuting people in retaliation, and then, of course, the big one is they don't care about justice, they only care about winning, and winning at all costs, even if it involves breaking the law. And that's what happened here. This poor guy, he went through a legal nightmare, but he's not the only one. There's a lot of us going through legal nightmares in Maine. I'm currently going through one myself, and it's worse than a nightmare. It's like straight out of the mind of Stephen King or something, which ironically he lives in Maine. But that's what we're going through when we're forced to deal with the corruption, cronyism, and just blatant retaliation that goes on in Maine. Legislature lodges complaint against local attorney. A Maine legislature who sits on the Judiciary Committee has filed a complaint against a local attorney with the Maine Commission on Indigent Legal Services. Representative Jeffrey Evangelos, an independent from Friendship, Maine, in a complaint dated November 4, called for attorney Mary Collette's immediate removal for cause from your roster of attorneys. The commission provides free and reduced costs legal services for Maine's indigent criminal defendants. Kellett, who is now in private practice, formerly worked as a Hancock County Assistant District Attorney. She was the lead prosecutor in a sexual assault case against former Gouldsburg residents Vladek Filler. Filler was eventually cleared of all charges. In a letter to the commission, Evangelos cited Kellett's sanctions by the Maine bar in connection with Filler's case as one of the reasons he doesn't think she should be defending Maine residents accused of crimes. Collette declined to comment. In 2007, Filler's then-wife accused him of sexual assault. The couple was engaged in a child custody dispute at the time. Filler was initially indicted on 5 counts of gross sexual assault and 2 counts of assault. After 2 trials and 2 appeals to the Maine law court, Filler was convicted only of 1 misdemeanor assault count, which was eventually dismissed. The Maine Board of Overseers of the bar suspended former prosecutor Collette for 30 days in 2013 after she acknowledged to the Maine Supreme Judicial Court that she violated bar rules during Filler's 2009 criminal trial. The suspension was suspended. Collette left the district attorney's office when District Attorney Matt Foster took over the office. Foster was sworn into office in January 1, 2015. Since he was exonerated, Filler has won 2 civil judgments. One award totaling $375,000 was made in 2018, stemming from a federal civil rights lawsuit Filler filed against Keller and another prosecutor, Paul Kavanaugh. The suit alleged that the prosecutors withheld, tampered with, and destroyed evidence. The suit also alleged conspiracy, malicious prosecution, and defamation. Earlier this year, Filler won a $1.7 million judgment against a witness in the case, his wife's friend, a nurse named Linda Gleason. Evangelos wrote in his letter to the commission, "Mary Gray Kellett has no place on your agency's roster of qualified attorneys. In 2009, in her capacity as Assistant District Attorney in Hancock County, she violated numerous laws and 7 bar rules, the most serious of which was her framing an innocent man for serious crimes, rape, and assault that he did not commit." Evangelos, in his complaint, also raised concerns about Kellett's involvement in the investigation of a gross sexual assault case in 2014. An attorney for a man serving a prison sentence for gross sexual assault of a former middle school student has filed a post-conviction review of the case. Attorney David A. Warens of the Portland firm Hallett Whipple Warens represents Ben Hodgson of Tremont. Warens stated via email that the hearing will take up Hodgson's claim that critical evidence which would have proven his innocence was mishandled earlier in the criminal case led by the lead detective in the Hancock County District Attorney's Office, and as a result that evidence was destroyed. Hodgson's hearing has been scheduled for November 20 and 22 in Hancock County Superior Court. At the time of the 2014 investigation, Kellett was handling sex crime prosecutions for the District Attorney's Office. However, with the changes in staffing at the DA's office, Deputy District Attorney Tofflin prosecuted the case in March 2016. Evangelos said Kellett's history should preclude her from providing legal services for indigent defendants. John D. Pelletier is the Commission's executive director. Pelletier said when the Commission receives a complaint, it addresses the complaint, discloses it to the attorney involved, and asks for a response. Once the Commission gets a response, the Board will make a decision about the complaint. We report the complaint that comes into our office to our commissioners at our monthly commissioners meeting, Pelletier said. This sort of complaint is uncommon, Pelletier said. Collette has been practicing law for 27 years. She was admitted to the Maine bar in 1992. So you can see that after she was found out that she was a dirty prosecutor, other convictions that she had made in the past also came forward and were saying that she messed up their prosecution too. So pretty much any prosecution she did can now be called into question, and it just creates a nightmare. But I wouldn't be surprised if there are a lot more prosecutors in the state of Maine that are guilty of these same crimes but don't get caught, because obviously there was an environment in that DA office where she felt like she could get away with what she was doing. I mean, you don't get away with stuff like that unless there's a coordinated effort, and that's why so many people were indicted. This is common in Maine, and Maine is the cover-up state. There's no police accountability or government accountability in Maine. There's no citizen oversight committee, a real citizen oversight committee with bite that can hold public officials accountable when they do stuff like this. The only reason that she was caught is because this man Filler, this Filler guy, had really good attorneys, and he decided not to take it laying down. But not everybody has backbone like this guy did. Not everybody's willing to go through a legal nightmare like this guy did. But he's a hero. And this prosecutor and these government officials, they are dirty scum. I remember my elementary school back in the 80s taking a trip to Boston to go to the Science Museum. And I was pretty amazed by all the exhibits and touring through the Science Museum. But the city itself kind of scared me as a boy that grew up in rural Maine. All the lights and sounds, the horns honking. It was a new experience for me, and when I was returning back to Maine, I remember looking out the bus window and seeing the Piscataqua River Bridge in the distance. I remember driving toward it as a passenger in the bus and thinking, once I'm on the other side of that bridge, I'm going to be in Maine. I'm going to be safe. Everything's going to be okay. Only another hour until I'm home. Now as an adult, in light of everything that's happened to me, in light of the state of Maine retaliating against me for being critical of them on social media about a police-involved shooting, now I have a whole different feeling when I approach the Piscataqua River Bridge. I drive through New Hampshire, I go through the toll booth, pay the toll. I drive to Portsmouth. Then I start to approach the bridge, and all of a sudden, this feeling comes over me. This feeling, once I'm on the other side of that bridge, am I going to be safe? Once I'm on the other side of that bridge, are the police going to pull me over in retaliation? Are they going to throw the book at me? Will I get another false charge? The anxiety that I feel just builds up. You go over the bridge ribs. You hear the sound of your tires make. Click-clunk, click-clunk, click-clunk. And then you're on the bridge. And then you're in Maine. The safety that I once felt by being inside the borders of Maine has gone away. And now it's been replaced with anxiety, fear that I feel when I enter the state of Maine, when I cross the Piscataqua River Bridge. Prior to Maine denying my PI license, I really was invisible. I just kept to myself. I did my own thing. I worked hard, kept my nose to the ground, built up my business, and then boom, I run into a brick wall of corruption up in Maine. If I hadn't have run into that brick wall of corruption, I would not be posting these videos right now. I would not be exposing corruption all throughout Maine government, pervasive corruption that infects every aspect of the public sector in the Maine state government, from the state police to local sheriff's departments to industries where cronyism just runs rampant. In fact, the corruption in Maine is so blatant and in your face, it just surprises me. My life seemed more peaceful and more tranquil prior to knowing that my home state, the state that I love, the state that I want to move back to, the state that I wanted to move my family to and raise my kids in, is just so corrupt. And I'm speaking to the public officials right now, the public officials, the corrupt and dirty public officials in Maine. All you had to do was give me the PI license and I would have just shut up. I wouldn't have said anything. I would have just moved on with my life. I didn't want this fight. We have to be the change we want to see in the world, and when you see corruption as bad and as blatant as I see in Maine, what choice do I have? I don't want this for myself, but what choice do I have? Anyway, today I wanted to discuss a case that happened in Maine quite a few years ago, but supposedly it brought about some reforms in the state, and I'm not so sure that it did. So let's learn about this case together. This is the case of Catherine Hagerty. Deputy describes Hagerty shooting. Officers told Catherine Hagerty was a crack shot. Second happened in Jackman, Maine. A deputy who was at the secluded camp when 51-year-old Catherine Hagerty was shot and killed last week. And this was written May 28, 1992, so this is quite an old article. Said Wednesday that the officers involved were afraid she might be suicidal and decided to enter the camp when they thought she was away from her gun. Thomas Giroux, a part-time deputy with the Somerset County Sheriff's Department, said that at one point she was lying in bed with the gun across her lap. We didn't know what her intentions were. I know it sounds terrible, but I think we were used, Giroux said during an interview from his Jackman home. Giroux, a longtime friend of the Hagertys, said the officers did what they had to do under the circumstances. This was the last thing in the world we wanted to happen, he said. Giroux was the first to arrive at the truck stop where 4 fishermen had taken refuge after fleeing from their campsite just 125 feet from the Hagertys' camp. The fishermen said that Hagerty had fired numerous shots from her front porch and then chased them from the area. Giroux awaited the arrival of Sergeant Wilford Hines, a Somerset County deputy, and Trooper Gary Wright of the Maine State Police. The officers put on their bulletproof vests at the truck stop. Giroux did not have one and borrowed one from Wright, he said. He disputed statements from one of the fishermen, Robert Day of Alfred, who told reporters about a week after the incident that he had overheard the officers say that they were going into the camp to take her out. Giroux remembered a short briefing in the parking lot during which Hines or Wright cautioned the other officers about the situation. They said, "Look, we know she's a crack shot. If something goes bad and we have to take her, don't hesitate. Don't wait for somebody to get hurt. If we have to, don't hesitate just because she's a woman," Giroux related. When the officers arrived, Giroux stood in the driveway in front of the camp and tried to talk to Hagerty while the other officers positioned themselves around the camp. An unidentified deputy was outside Hagerty's window after about 15 minutes with no verbal response, he shined his flashlight into her bedroom. The deputy told the others that she was lying on the bed with a rifle across her lap. He ducked when he saw her begin to raise the rifle in the direction, and he shut off his flashlight, Giroux said. Giroux then heard Hagerty holler out, "How do I know what your intentions are?" I said, "Kathy, you know me. My intentions are honorable," Giroux related. The officers never saw her move from the bedroom to the living room, Giroux said. The next contact they had with her was a few minutes later when she pressed her face near the front window and spotted Somerset deputy Renee Guay. She said, "I see you there," and that's when Guay shines his flashlight inside, Giroux said. Hagerty was kneeling near the couch below the window where Guay was positioned with a shotgun. She was smiling, Giroux said. He said Guay and Hines had earlier told Hagerty they were there, introduced themselves, and tried to convince her to leave the cabin. It was Guay who attempted to convince her to leave the cabin by telling her that the police were looking into some area camp break-ins. Guay asked her if she had seen 4 campers in the area that might have been involved in the break-ins, and Hagerty told him she hadn't seen anyone, Giroux said. Trooper Wright didn't say anything because they'd had a run-in before and they didn't want to anger her, so he kept quiet, Giroux said. A few minutes later, Guay yelled to Hines and Wright, who were positioned at the front door. He said, "I don't see a gun. Go for it." Giroux remembered. Hines and Wright charged into the door, but the chain lock prevented it from opening all the way. In the few seconds it took the officers to push the door again and get through, Hagerty had picked up the rifle, Giroux said. "I heard them yell, 'Put the gun down, put the gun down, put it down.' But she just stood there and smiled and kept raising it. When it got into position where it was aiming right at those guys, they fired," he said. That all took place within a couple of seconds, Giroux said. Giroux said if the door had opened on the first try, the shooting would not have occurred. "We never saw her go into the living room. We thought she might have left the gun in the bedroom. But come to find out, she had brought it with her and hid it under the couch," Giroux said. After the shooting, the officers found a note tacked on the inside of the door. Giroux said they looked at the note and saw it made some reference to Catherine's husband, Jack Hagerty, but they didn't read it. The note was seized as evidence by the state attorney general's office. On Wednesday, Attorney General Michael Carpenter said the note was not a suicide note, but was a kind of rambling. He said it was the kind of note that seemed to be left there for someone who might go to the camp and find it locked up. It did not contain some obscenities, Carpenter said. The suicide theory, however, seemed to contradict statements made by Jack Hagerty, who said his wife called him and his 2 sons on the day of the shooting. Jack Hagerty said his wife was in good spirits and was thrilled about the trip she planned to embark on the following day. She planned to make a circuitous trip back to Florida and had made up itinerary cards and sent them to friends in Maine and relatives in Massachusetts and a sister in Wisconsin. She was bubbling with joy, Jack Hagerty said. Giroux acknowledged that the officers were not sure that a suicide was her intention, but at the time it was a concern for them. Hindsight is 20/20, but the way the circumstances presented themselves, in my opinion, I think we did what we had to do. It was a terrible thing that happened. There is no reward in this, Giroux said. The Attorney General's office is scheduled to release the results of the investigation during a press conference on Thursday in Augusta. Interesting case. Quite an interesting case. So Catherine died as a result of the gunshot wounds, and obviously in the aftermath of the shooting, the police had their story, but the evidence told a different story. This is another case, although it happened in the 90s, where it reeks of a cover-up happening, and police coordinating their stories and telling a story, an official story, that doesn't line up with the evidence that's at hand. Now, I wasn't sure that I wanted to read this, but sometimes legal briefs... Oh, and this is a live stream, so if you have any comments, please write them and I will address the comments, or if you have any questions or just observations, or if I miss anything, tell me. If you know about this story, definitely chime in. But sometimes court documents give you a better sense of the details of the case than newspaper articles. They definitely stick to the facts. And we'll see what the facts are when Hagerty versus Somerset County was filed in the U.S. Court of Appeals in the First Circuit. let's see. On May 15, 1992, I'll blow this up a little. State and county law enforcement officers forcibly entered a remote cabin in the woods of Maine, in the Maine woods, without a warrant, and mortally wounded plaintiff's descendant, Catherine Hagerty, while attempting to arrest her for reckless endangering the safety of 4 campers. Plaintiff John Hagerty initiated the present action in federal district court for compensatory and punitive damages against the defendants, officers and their respective supervisors, based on alleged violations of the Hagerty's statutory and constitutional rights. After rejecting their qualified immunity claim, the district court determined that the defendant officers were potentially liable for punitive damages, and the officers initiated an interlocutory appeal. Plaintiff Hagerty, John Hagerty, in turn, John Hagerty, of course, is the husband, in turn cross-appealed from the district court, blah, blah, blah. The warrantless entry. This is a part of the background. During the morning of that fateful day, 2 vehicles containing 4 campers entered through a gate onto woodlands owned by a paper mill in Jackman, Maine. Proceeded to their assigned campsite about 1.5 miles past the gate and 200 yards or so beyond the Hagerty cabin. Around 9 p.m. in the evening, Catherine Hagerty became extremely agitated when she saw the campers returning to their campsite for the night and began screaming that they had trespassed on her property. The campers assured her that that the caretaker had given them permission to use the campsite and they would be leaving the next morning, to which Catherine responded, "Only if you make it until next morning." She then retrieved a rifle from inside the cabin and fired 6 rounds from the porch in the direction of the campers, who immediately took cover behind their trucks in a boat. During the next 4 hours or so, Catherine reloaded her rifle several times, firing approximately 25 additional rounds in the direction of the campers, before eventually yielding to their pleas for permission to depart in safety. Leaving their other belongings behind, the campers drove their vehicles quickly past the cabin, where they saw Catherine on the porch, rifle in hand. Although no further shots were fired, Catherine followed the campers in her truck beyond the entrance gate and then turned back in the direction of her cabin. Upon their arrival at the truck stop located on Route 202, approximately 2 miles from the Woods Road entrance gate, the campers immediately placed a telephone call to the Somerset County Sheriff's Department. Their report describes a harrowing encounter with an intoxicated, distraught, quote, flipped out, unquote, an armed woman who might pursue them to the truck stop and shoot at them. 4 law enforcement officers were dispatched to the truck stop: Maine State Trooper Gary Wright and 3 Somerset County Sheriff's Department officers, Patrol Sergeant Wilfred Hines, Deputy Sheriff Renee Guay, and Reserve Officer Thomas Giroux, Jr. After briefly interviewing the 4 campers, the officers decided that the suspect had committed at least one offense by shooting at the campers. The offense would be reckless endangerment. Moreover, from the description the campers gave of the woman, the locations of the cabin and the campsite, and from their knowledge of the area, the officers concluded that Catherine Hagerty was their suspect. The officers knew that Catherine was an expert hunter and a licensed Maine guide with a reputation as a crack shot, a quote, crack shot, end quote, and that she kept several powerful firearms at the cabin. Further, the officers knew she had some history of emotional instability. She had a nervous breakdown in 1991 that required sedation, physical restraints, and a brief period of involuntary hospitalization. Interesting. Substance abuse, 2 arrest records for operating a motor vehicle while under the influence, and incidents of erratic, violent behavior directed at law enforcement personnel. Kicking and throwing punches at State Trooper Gary Wright, asking irrational questions and exhibiting extreme mood swings, alternately screaming and laughing at the time of her first OUI arrest, and an assault on harassment against Trooper Wright at his residence shortly after the same arrest. For these reasons, the officers concluded that they should arrest Catherine immediately without obtaining a warrant or informing her of their true intentions until after she had been restrained, for fear that she would become violent. At around midnight, the officers rendezvoused with a fifth officer, Sergeant William Crawford Jr. of the Somerset County Sheriff's Department, drove about 3 miles and parked their cruisers approximately a mile from the Hagerty cabin. Their sporadic discussions since meeting at the truck stop had led to a skeleton plan of action for effecting the arrest. Concerned that Catherine might be waiting for them somewhat in the vicinity, they proceeded on foot toward her cabin, led by Trooper Wright, with a police dog, in an effort to forewarn themselves of Catherine's presence without heralding their approach. As they neared at approximately 12:15 a.m., wow, so it was real dark in the morning, the officers observed Catherine's truck in front of the darkened cabin and heard a radio blaring music from inside. The clearing surrounding the cabin was plainly visible in the moonlight, but the cabin's interior was not illuminated. Interesting. Following a quick visual inspection of the cabin site and the interior of the Hagerty truck, 4 officers approached unannounced and placed themselves along the outer cabin walls. The 5th officer, Thomas Giroux Jr., who was better acquainted with Catherine Hagerty, gave a pre-arranged signal to the other officers from behind a tree across the road in front of the cabin. Giroux began calling to Catherine by name, first identifying himself and then expressing concern for her safety in an attempt to coax her from the cabin to speak with him. Giroux heard no response above the blaring radio. Sergeant Hines then pounded on the cabin door and identified himself as a deputy sheriff. He received no response either. Meanwhile, Sergeant Crawford, who had worked his way around to the rear of the cabin, shined a flashlight into the darkened window and saw a fully clothed woman lying on a bed with a rifle across her chest. When the woman began to raise the rifle in his direction, Crawford dove for cover, yelling out to the other officers that there was an armed person inside the cabin. Catherine soon asked Crawford to identify himself. After he did so, Crawford heard Catherine leave the bedroom and move toward the front of the cabin. The radio soon became inaudible. As Catherine walked about inside the cabin, the darkened cabin, she kept asking what the officers were doing there and requesting that they leave her property. The officers replied that they were investigating a report of campsite burglaries in the area, were concerned for her safety, and wanted her to come out of the cabin so she could speak with them. Laughing intermittently during these exchanges, Catherine ultimately rejected their request, stating that she had seen no one suspicious. Deputy Sheriff Rene Guy, posted outside the closed window at the front of the cabin, next saw Catherine face to face as she peered out the window from her kneeling position on a nearby couch. When Guay trained his flashlight on her, Catherine said, "I can see you." At the time, Guay observed that Catherine had no weapon in hand, nor within the vicinity illuminated by his flashlight. Guay immediately communicated this information to Sergeant Hines and Trooper Wright, who were posted on either side of the front door, then gave them a signal to go. Sergeant Hines proceeded to break in the front door, but a chain lock momentarily delayed entry. From a crouched position outside the front window, Guay saw Catherine pick up a rifle beside the couch and began to raise it in the direction of Hines and Wright, who were about to break through the front door. As she continued to raise the rifle in their direction, the officers ordered her to drop it. Catherine paid no heed and was fatally wounded by the officers before she could fire a shot. Interesting. So, based on that description, we have Catherine Hagerty, who has a history of mental disease. We have campers that were camping at a site near her cabin. We have a lot of questions that are not answered yet. Namely, the campsite was not on her property, but was she made aware that those campers were going to be in the area? That's issue number one. And issue number two is when the officers talked to the campers, they were telling stories that she was shooting at them. But when they went out to the site, could they verify that they were being shot at? Did they find shell casings? Did they find any bullets, or were they just taking the word of these campers? Because to me, it sounds like they do not have enough evidence to make an arrest of her. Maybe if they could get her out of her cabin and talking to them, and she would admit that she was shot at them, then they would have probable cause and they could make the arrest. But at this point, they just have these campers that are saying that there was a crazy woman that they don't even know who she was shooting at them, and the officers kind of have this confab in a parking lot, and they decide that, oh, the suspect has to be Catherine Hagerty, and so they go out there with a pre-devised plan to actually get her out of the cabin under a pretense or a pretext, and then arrest her based on what the campers had said, rather than talk to her, get her to admit that she had shot at the campers, and then arrest her. And then we have another issue that, it's a glaring issue. Number one, you have the right to have a firearm in Maine. I don't know if what the laws were back in the 90s. Maybe there's a case that she shouldn't have a firearm because of her mental illness that was documented. But the police officers would not know whether she had a legal right to possess a firearm or not unless they did some more research. And number two, you have the Constitution, which gives you the right to your person's possessions and papers inside your residence. And the only way that a police officer can enter your residence or your property is with a warrant. And the police admit that they don't have a warrant. So, even if she did raise her gun up and shoot the officers, she would be in the right, not them. That's my first impression here. This article also was published actually earlier this year. 18 years ago, back in 2002, which kind of gives an update about the shooting, which I think is very informative to what happened here. The Hagerty shooting tempers police attitude on standoffs. In a remote cabin at the end of a logging road outside Jackman, a group of police officers crept up to the house of Catherine Hagerty and burst through the door a decade ago. Facing the barrel of a loaded rifle, they shot the 51-year-old woman dead. The events leading to Hagerty's death on May 16, 1992, sparked a wave of criticism and questions about police responses to standoff situations. A task force appointed by then Attorney General Michael Carpenter examined Maine laws regarding police use of force. Just based on what we already know about this case, a lot of mistakes were made by the police. This woman did not have to die that day. So many mistakes were made. The police can't just show up and execute you because you exercise a few rights. The task force, the events leading to Hagerty's death on May 16, 1992, sparked a wave of criticism and questions about police responses to standoff in situations. A task force appointed by then Attorney General Michael Carpenter examined Maine laws regarding police use of force. The task force recommendations led to new laws that dramatically raised the minimum standard for law enforcement officers in Maine. Entrance requirements for police cadets were raised, training was expanded for all new officers, and new policies were established for local police dealing with high-risk situations. And here we go. Brian McMaster, Chief of Investigations for the State Attorney General's Office and Chairman of the Criminal Justice Academy Board of Trustees, said one of the most significant changes precipitated by Hagerty shooting was not incorporated into any law or policy. There is probably a greater sense of accountability in law enforcement in terms of the actions and operations they undertake, a greater sense they're going to be held accountable to the public, said McMaster. What a joke, what a laugh. That's actually a comedy sketch that he would say that, because that is not true. And did you catch that he says that one of the most significant changes precipitated by Hagerty's shooting was not incorporated into any law or policy? meaning that they did not at all make any changes after this shooting. But let's continue and see if I am mistaken here. An investigation after Hagerty's death cleared the officers of any criminal wrongdoing. I mean, we just went through all the wrong they did, and they were cleared. But Carpenter was highly critical, declaring their tactics ill-conceived, poorly planned, and hastily executed. Not to mention, violated the Constitution, violated standard police protocol, violated civil rights, violated human rights. Let's not mention all those other tactics. I mean, let's face it, she was a crazy woman. But she never shot. They said she was a crackpot shot, but she was shooting at campers for like 20 minutes or whatever. 20 shots, I think is what they said, and she never hit them. So obviously she wasn't aiming for the campers, even if you buy the campers story that she was shooting at them, which I have no reason to doubt. I'm sure that happened. There's really no reason to doubt that happened. But the fact is, the police officers could not have known, based on the story from the campers, that Hagerty was the one that was shooting at them. They just said there was a crazy woman out by their campsite that was shooting at them. So the police officers could not have known that it was Catherine Hagerty. And then, even though she was holding a gun when she was laying in bed, she never shot the officers. She raised her gun at the officers while she was in her house. But you're allowed to do that while you're in your house. She didn't know who those officers were. It was just a dude shining a flashlight into her house. She had the radio on. She couldn't hear them say that she was that they were police officers. And once she determined that they were police officers, we only have their word after they killed her. I mean, keep in mind they killed her. So this is not a he said, she said. This is there's a dead victim and they made up a story, basically. That I'm not saying they did, but to me it certainly sounds like this was a cover your butt scenario where they probably made up a story. Let me read this again. An investigation after Hagerty's death cleared the officers of any criminal wrongdoing, but Carpenter was highly critical, declaring their tactics ill-conceived, poorly planned, and hastily executed. Highly critical? We have officers that violated so many normal standard procedures of police, but they get no punishment. They're cleared, except for the Attorney General puts a statement saying, well, you know, they could have done better, but we're clearing them. This is why police officers in Maine feel like they can get away with anything, because even when it's so clear that they messed up, it's like blaringly clear. Even their story proves that they messed up. They don't get punished. They're cleared. It's disgusting. And of course, Brian McMaster is involved. He's always involved. DL writes, Brian McMaster, Chief of Investigation for State AG and Chairman of the Criminal Justice Academy, is a gross conflict of interest. Amen. Not to mention, he is a former police officer himself, and basically, as far as I can tell, he's the de facto AG of the state of Maine going back, I don't even know how long. This story is from 1992. I mean, is this guy immortal or something? He just keeps going and going. The whole incident involving Hagerty took about 11 minutes. Hagerty was a veteran Maine guide who had run hunting camps in areas surrounding Jackman near the Canadian border. The incident arose after a confrontation with some fishermen who camped near the property. Hagerty, who appeared highly intoxicated at the time, fired shots over the heads and chased them away. Actually, let's look at it from her perspective for a second. You have a whole bunch of men that are hanging out right next to your camp. You don't know why they're there. You haven't been told that they're going to be there, and you just want them to go away because you're a single woman in your 50s in a cabin, in a remote cabin by yourself. You know, I can see a scenario where firing shots over the head is not a crazed thing to do, but is a practical thing to do for your own safety. I'm not saying that she wasn't crazed and drunk and all that stuff, but if I'm getting shots fired over my head, I'm probably going to think she's crazed, whether it's the truth or not. I mean, the police there's a thing that happens in law enforcement where the first person to dial the police, the first person to contact the police is the person that the police believe. Or if the police respond to a scene, the first person they talk to is the person that they end up always siding with. It's a psychological thing that police and sometimes we as humans do. And what makes a good police officer stand out from a poor police officer is the ability to get past that psychological gate or limitation that you have, where you actually follow the facts and the evidence, and wherever they take you, you respond accordingly and according to what the truth is, rather than the first person that contacts you. And these officers didn't do any of that. These officers did a horrible job. I'm not saying they're horrible police officers. Haven't researched them, but I'm saying in this case they did a horrible job and they deserved to be punished. Hagerty refused to come out of her cabin as ordered, and officers, believing that she had put down her gun, entered the cabin. They don't mention in this article, they entered the cabin illegally without a warrant. They didn't have any probable cause to go into the cabin. This was 100% an illegal entry, which makes it no different from a burglar smashing through your front door. At the instant that they smashed through her front door, even identifying themselves as police officer, she had the right to shoot them because it was an illegal search. They didn't say we have a warrant. They didn't say anything. And for those of you who think, well, they were police officers. Well, anybody can order police uniforms from a catalog store back in the 90s or from Amazon today. Anybody can order police uniforms, badge, guns, batons, all that stuff, and storm into a situation claiming to be police officers. In fact, they make movies about it. I think there's a movie about a huge bank robbery in Boston where they dressed up as police officers. So just because you look like a police officer, you say you're a police officer and all that, doesn't mean you're a police officer. And the way that you can tell whether they're a police officer or not is when they say, knock, knock, we have a warrant to come into your house. If you don't open the door, we're going to smash it. Not smash into the door. That's how criminals act. She probably thought they were criminals. By the time the officers rammed the door open, Hagerty had retrieved her .22 caliber rifle. She aimed it toward the officers, and that's what the officers say. Keep in mind that the officers killed this girl, and they had time before investigators got there to coordinate their stories. I'm not saying they did, but I'm just saying that they very well could have made up the fact that she aimed the rifle at them. But even if she did, let's just take the facts as presented, she still wouldn't be violating the law. Think about that. A shotgun blast fired by one of the officers. She aimed it toward the officers. A shotgun blast fired by one of the officers at the window killed her instantly. The situation turned out to be vastly different from one on April 4 in the same part of the state, long after new policies and training standards had been adopted. A drunken and despondent man locked himself in his Jackman house and refused to come out. Some of the best armed and best trained police in the state took position around his house and waited. They negotiated, talked, and waited patiently for 6 hours until the man finally came out voluntarily. So you can sort of see how this story has developed. You can sort of see that the police screwed up majorly. And as far as the police reforms that came out of this story was brought to us and written in June 24, 2020, about how Maine has updated its rules for use of force based on the incidents that have happened all around the country that have caused all these mass things to riots to, and protests around the country. Brian McMaster claimed that they suggested changes of the use of force and standoffs and entry into a house after this Hagerty shooting, but they never implemented any of it. And the few things that they suggested was that, oh, well, because we talked about this case, that's basically what he said. Because we talked about this case, and because the Attorney General said the officers could have done a little better, now police know that there's more accountability and they're going to guard their behaviors a little more. Well, that's just nothing. That's not a reform. That doesn't have any accountability with a bite. Police officers still know that they can get away with anything they want. If a child messes up and then you say, you messed up, but we're not going to punish you in any way, do you think that child's going to stop doing whatever it was that he did? He's going to keep doing it. And the police in Maine have zero accountability. We don't even have a citizen oversight committee in the state of Maine. And I live in Boston, but I'm from Maine. My heart's in Maine. You know, I'm a Mainer through and through. And I've had reasons to, you know, tell these stories about how Maine has no police accountability. And it's because of stories like this. I mean, let's recap this story really quickly. The police receive a call that there's a crazed woman with a gun. Based on nothing more than the statements of a few people, an entire, basically, posse of police officers storm a 51-year-old woman's cabin in a remote part of Maine at 12:30 in the morning. It's pitch black. They're storming the cabin with a dog in front of them, and they're using the moonlight to guide them. They get to her cabin and the radio's blaring, so she doesn't hear them say, hey, what's going on? The police are here. And the first sight she sees of them is when a flashlight is shined through her window and she has no clue who it is. And so she raises her gun up, she's sleeping with a gun because she's a 51-year-old woman in the remote part of Maine. Who knows what could happen? You know, that's not an uncommon thing. And she sees this flashlight, so she points it. The flashlight goes down. She shuts off her radio. She then starts a dialogue. And then these people who claim to be police officers smash through her door and kill her. And then they get no punishment whatsoever at all when they violated her civil rights, her human rights, her constitutional rights. They violated every single norm, standard protocol, or standard operating procedure of a police officer, and they get no punishment. Even if you take the facts the way that the police lay them out, and I'm sure they tried to cover their butt, they still are wrong here, and they should have been punished. They should have lost their jobs over this. They killed a woman. The consequence of them screwing up is not that she got bruised and had to go to the hospital. She died. They killed her. Maine updates rules for use of force bias based on profiling. Not sure if this relates 100% with the Catherine Hagerty shooting, but this is their latest attempt to try to reform and bring accountability to police, but once again, it fails miserably. In response to racial bias and police brutality in other parts of the country, the Maine Criminal Justice Academy Board of Trustees made changes to the state's use of force rules. Trustees also made it mandatory to report any bias-based profiling complaints. We were all horrified to watch the situation in Minneapolis, and quite frankly, just the conversation around use of force and bias-based policing and race relations all kind of came in to the head, said Rick Desjardins, butchering that name, the Academy's director. He said the policies were implicit in law enforcement and now the 7 basic written rules. So basically they're just trying to put lipstick on a pig because they want the violent protests to stay out of Maine. That's basically all this is. He said the policies were implicit in law enforcement and now are 7 basic written rules. Whether it's chokeholds, whether it's intervening, whether it's bias-based reporting, we felt like codifying those into minimal standards were important, Jardin said. The standards ban chokeholds, excessive force, and firing weapons at moving vehicles unless deadly force is authorized. They also require officers to provide aid anytime a person is in custody, appears to be injured, or is in medical distress. And now it's mandatory for officers to intervene and report to superiors when they see any other officer using unreasonable and unnecessary force. You are required to report it. If you don't, you're just as guilty as the person who did it, Desjardins said. Yeah, that's a laugh. That's just lip service, because if a cop in Maine ever did something, they would, unless it's on dash cam and maybe they release it, the Maine cover-up Inc., led by Brian McMaster, would make sure that it never became public. You're required to report it. Next line. I can tell you right now that the officers we train in this state, if they saw what happened in Minneapolis, they would have said something. They would have done something, he said. The shooting of Catherine Hagerty at a remote cabin in Jackson in 1992 led to public outcry and prompted what is known as the Hagerty Law, which creates rules for setting minimum standards for the use of deadly force. After the Hagerty shooting, some really, really smart people in the state made some changes, and other states, quite frankly, are so envious of what we're able to do, Jardin said, referring to the board's ability to decertify officers. Law enforcement departments in Maine must adopt written policies that align with those established by the Criminal Justice Academy's Board of Trustees. I challenge anybody to find me an officer in Maine that has been decertified based on this supposed Hagerty Law. Email that person's name to me. I did some research today and couldn't find one. That is just another lip service law that they put into effect because they do not hold police officers accountable in the state of Maine. In fact, there's an ongoing thing in Maine's entire history, and Maine's been a state since 1820. So or 1825, something like that. So we're working on, 200 years. In a 200-year history, Maine has not had a single unjustified police-involved shooting where the officers were punished. This Catherine Hagerty one would be prime example of why there is no police accountability. There was also a shooting that I looked into where the police did not have to kill or fire their weapons, although it's controversial. A lot of people will say that I'm being stupid for even saying this, but I looked into the shooting of Amber Fagree and Cadhar Bailey, and they did not have to die. That was in Vassalboro. The state police were called out to investigate a burglary. They found the getaway car, for lack of a better term, and they opened fire on it and killed 2 people, including a passenger who had, by all accounts, nothing to do with the burglary that happened earlier that day. There should have been some punishments handed down there. I'm not saying that Trooper Parks or Lieutenant Ireland should have lost their jobs as a result of those shootings, but there should have been punishments handed down, just like in this Hagerty shooting. Although in this Hagerty shooting, everybody should have lost their job. This was unacceptable. Everybody should have lost their job. Are police policies and training in the 90s any different than today's policies and training? Well, supposedly they are, but the rules that they supposedly implemented have never resulted in anybody being disciplined that I can find. So I put a challenge out there. If I'm wrong about that, please email me, send a message, put a comment under this video, anything. Just get the message to me that there have been officers who have been punished as a result of the changes that were made after the Hagerty shooting. on the supposed Hagerty law. I couldn't find any, and I looked. I'm not saying that they're not out there. I'm just saying that I couldn't find any. And I mean, I did put in a full day today. I am sort of burning, the candle at both ends right now, so I could have missed it. But I haven't seen anything like that. So that's what I wanted to say on that. Check out this, and then I'll be right back after this. I remember my elementary school back in the 80s taking a trip to Boston to go to the Science Museum. And I was pretty amazed by all the exhibits and touring through the Science Museum. But the city itself kind of scared me as a boy that grew up in rural Maine. All the lights and sounds, the horns honking. It was a new experience for me. And when I was returning back to Maine, I remember looking out the bus window and seeing the Piscataqua River Bridge in the distance. I remember driving toward it as a passenger in the bus and thinking, once I'm on the other side of that bridge, I'm going to be in Maine. I'm going to be safe. Everything's going to be okay. Only another hour until I'm home. Now as an adult, in light of everything that's happened to me, in light of the state of Maine retaliating against me for being critical of them on social media about a police-involved shooting, now I have a whole different feeling when I approach the Piscataqua River Bridge. I drive through New Hampshire, I go through the toll booth, pay the toll. I drive to Portsmouth. Then I start to approach the bridge, and all of a sudden, this feeling comes over me. This feeling, once I'm on the other side of that bridge, am I going to be safe? Once I'm on the other side of that bridge, are the police going to pull me over in retaliation? Are they going to throw the book at me? Will I get another false charge? The anxiety that I feel just builds up. You go over the bridge ribs, you hear the sound of your tires make clunk, 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 clunk. And then you're on the bridge. And then you're in Maine. The safety that I once felt by being inside the borders of Maine has gone away, and now it's been replaced with anxiety, fear that I feel when I enter the state of Maine, when I cross the Piscataqua River Bridge.
Hi, my name is Amber, and I have a dog here who when I twerk, they hump my leg.
Killed in Maine, a controversial police shooting by Joshua Gray, PI from Boston, Massachusetts. Vassalboro, Maine. A girl is killed by the police. She was the passenger in a vehicle driven by a man who just committed armed burglary. In a desperate attempt to escape from the police, the man crashed into a police cruiser, and two troopers shot and killed Cadhar Bailey and Ambrosia Amber Fagree. The incident garnered media attention, and once again a controversial police-involved shooting was in the news. Maine State Trooper Jeff Parks fired the shot that killed Amber Fagree, and Lieutenant Scott Ireland fired the shot that killed Cadhar Bailey. After nearly a year-long Attorney General's investigation, the officers were cleared of all wrongdoing. This was an all-too-familiar outcome. In the entire history of Maine, every police-involved shooting has been found to be justified. Right from the beginning, most people assumed this was a good shoot, and the police officers did nothing wrong. However, when you take a closer look, not everything is how it seems. First, we must look at the events that led up to the shooting, and also the investigation that was conducted to clear them. When two people are killed, this is the least we can do. It's important to start this article by disclosing that I have a history with Lieutenant Scott Ireland, the officer who killed Cadhar Bailey, and believe him to be a dirty cop. My interest in this shooting was influenced by that belief. Prior to the killings, I repeatedly warned he was a bad cop who would eventually kill someone. In fact, I wrote articles, posted on social media, and filed an internal affairs complaint against him to prevent this exact thing from happening. When I learned that he killed someone, I was overcome with intense emotions that I did not do more to warn people. It's hard to describe the guilt you feel when someone that you predicted would kill actually kills a fellow human being. I have provided links to the other articles at the bottom of this and in the description of the video. Cadhar Bailey was a self-employed roofer from Gardner, Maine. I was told that he was a hard worker who was proud to be a small businessman. However, he had a dark side. Like so many young people in Maine and New England, he had become addicted to drugs and alcohol. His roofing business was struggling, and the persistent call of addiction led him down a dark path to the rural town of Vassalboro, Maine. Some say that he went to this town with a young 18-year-old girl known to her friends as Ambrosia Amber Fagree. Exactly how Amber ended up in his vehicle as a passenger is not clear. Amber's boyfriend Nick Penny claims that she liked to hitchhike and was picked up by Cadhar to get a ride back from the to the Augusta area. Cadhar's relatives, who wishes to not be named, claims that Amber and Cadhar were drug buddies who would get high together. Regardless of how they both ended up in the same vehicle, the events of that winter day would end with Amber fighting for her life and Cadhar dead. Cadhar parked his vehicle, a Dodge Durango that he had borrowed from his uncle, at a turnaround point on Arnold Road in Vassalboro. He left Amber in the vehicle and walked through snow and forest to a residential house. He walked to the home of Richard Brown, and knocked on the door. He offered to shovel Mr. Brown's roof for $100. When Mr. Brown declined the offer, he watched as Cadhar walked away from the house. Moments later, Mr. Brown heard sounds coming from his garage. He discovered Mr. Bailey in the garage and was then allegedly held at gunpoint. Mr. Bailey tied his arms and legs and put him in the basement. Mr. Bailey proceeded to ransack his house over several hours. He finally stole Mr. Brown's pickup truck and departed the house after threatening to kill. There is little question that Mr. Bailey committed a burglary, tied up the homeowner, and stole the truck on this day. If Cadhar Bailey had lived, he would most likely be serving a lengthy prison sentence for his actions. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Scott Ireland of the Maine State Police was returning home. He lived on Arnold Road, only a half a mile from the turnaround point where the Dodge Durango was parked. A neighbor informed Lieutenant Ireland, who was off-duty and wearing civilian clothing, of the suspicious Dodge Durango parked down the road. Lieutenant Ireland put on his police belt and jacket, hopped into his unmarked cruiser, and went to the area. He observed Amber Fagree slumped over in the passenger seat. He noticed the vehicle was running and feared that she could be suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. He knocked on the window and was able to get her attention. Lieutenant Ireland discovered that she was out of it. Miss Fagree told Lieutenant Ireland she was waiting for her boyfriend to return and gave several names including Nick, Brian, and Hunter, but could not give a last name. She never mentioned Cadhar's first name. Sergeant Galen Estes of the Kennebec County Sheriff's Office arrived on scene. Lieutenant Ireland spotted footprints in the snow leading to Mr. Richard Brown's house and attempted to reach Mr. Brown on the phone. When he could not reach him, he called relatives. When nobody could reach Mr. Brown, Lieutenant Ireland decided to go investigate and left Sergeant Estes to watch Amber. It should be noted that for Lieutenant Ireland to know who lived in the direction of the footprints, know the homeowner's phone number, and further know his relatives' phone numbers, it seemed logical to assume Lieutenant Ireland was friends with Mr. Brown. Lieutenant Ireland received a call from a nephew of Mr. Brown who informed him his uncle had been robbed at gunpoint and tied up. Lieutenant Ireland spotted Mr. Brown's truck pulled off the road and observed footprints in the snow. Because Lieutenant Ireland lived in and knew the area, he believed the footprints would lead back to where the Dodge Durango was parked. Back at the Dodge Durango, Chief Mark Brown of the Vassalboro, Maine Police Department had arrived on scene. Sergeant Estes decided to move a few police vehicles that were blocking the narrow dead-end road while Chief Brown watched Amber. Drugs were discovered in the vehicle with Amber. However, Chief Brown had not arrested, moved her to a police cruiser, called for an ambulance, or made any effort to get her out of the Dodge Durango. While Sergeant Estes was moving a police vehicle, Lieutenant Ireland was radioing to Chief Brown that an armed suspect may be walking in his direction. Chief Brown looked and saw Cadhar Bailey walking toward him, and saw what he believed to be a gun in his hand. Chief Brown moved from the passenger side of the Durango to the driver's side to seek cover. He had ordered Mr. Bailey to stop. However, Mr. Bailey continued to approach. Simultaneously, Trooper Jeff Parks of the Maine State Police arrived just down the road. Chief Brown discharged his weapon and got behind a snowbanking. Chief Brown then heard a loud sound. He believed it to be gunfire. However, it could have been Cadhar Bailey closing the Dodge Durango's door as he entered. Trooper Jeff Parks heard the gunfire and stopped his police vehicle in the middle of the road, blocking the only point of departure for Mr. Bailey, and exited the vehicle for cover. Mr. Bailey accelerated the Dodge Durango with Amber in the passenger seat. Trooper Parks fired several rounds at the Dodge Durango, and it crashed into the police cruiser that was blocking the road. The impact was enough to deploy the airbags of the police vehicle and push it back 50 feet. However, the airbags did not deploy in the Dodge Durango. It seemed clear that Mr. Bailey was trying to escape the police and ramming the empty police cruiser that was blocking the road was his only option to achieve that objective. Both Chief Brown and Trooper Parks had failed to stop or hit Mr. Bailey with their gunfire. However, Trooper Parks had hit Amber Fagree with a round, and she was now bleeding and injured in the passenger seat. Trooper Parks claims that he did not know there was a passenger in the vehicle and did not see the passenger. This seems curious, as Lieutenant Ireland, Sergeant Estes, and Chief Brown were all aware that she was in the vehicle, and there had to be radio traffic about Miss Fagree being in the vehicle. Regardless, she was in the vehicle and would die as a result of the gunshot injuries. Lieutenant Scott Ireland had arrived at the scene and observed Mr. Bailey with a hand out the window. He ordered Mr. Bailey to show his hands and then observed a series of quick movements toward the center console area of the vehicle. Lieutenant Ireland interpreted this as Mr. Bailey reaching for a gun. However, could have been Mr. Bailey noticing that Amber was shot and bleeding and reaching over to help her. Lieutenant Ireland fired his weapon at Mr. Bailey and killed him. Mr. Cadhar Bailey died at the scene, and Amber Fagree was rushed to the hospital, where she later died. After looking into this police-involved shooting in my spare time, it's my opinion that neither Cadhar Bailey nor Amber Fagree had to die that day. I base this on the information that I have learned through talking with multiple people, reading newspaper articles, and reviewing the Attorney General's report on the shooting. Lieutenant Ireland's career is marked with one instance after another of taking the law into his own hands. He has a pattern of making himself judge, jury, and executioner. I am convinced that Mr. Bailey's fate was determined the moment Lieutenant Ireland left the side of Amber Fagree. Leaving Amber when she was clearly high on drugs speaks volumes in regard to Lieutenant Ireland's motivation. Rather than use his cell phone or police radio to ask another officer to investigate his neighbor's house, Lieutenant Ireland decided that he had to do it. This demonstrates, in my opinion, that Lieutenant Ireland put zero value on Amber's life and thought he was the only police officer in Maine qualified to catch the bad guy. If Lieutenant Ireland had not left, both Amber and Cadhar would still be alive, in my opinion. This entire incident could have been avoided if Lieutenant Ireland's ego was held in check and he simply asked another officer to check out Mr. Brown's house. However, his actions are 100% consistent with somebody who routinely elevates himself to judge, jury, and executioner. This is why I believe he is a dirty cop and a danger to the people of Maine. This is what led me to predict that he would kill someone. When it comes to the killing of Amber Fagree, I find that multiple mistakes were made that led to her death. These mistakes were avoidable, and it is my opinion that she did not have to die that day. Lieutenant Scott Ireland should have never left Miss Fagree after making contact with her. He should have remained by her side until an ambulance took her away or she was arrested. When he saw the footprints in the snow leading to his neighbor's house, a neighbor who he was believed to be friends with, he should have called it in and let another officer investigate it. When Chief Brown and Sergeant Estes learned the drugs in the possession of Amber Fagree, she should have been handcuffed and moved to a patrol car so that the crime scene could be preserved and a detailed search of the Dodge Durango could be conducted. When Mr. Bailey approached the Dodge Durango, Chief Brown should have been able to stop him before he entered the vehicle and smashed into the police cruiser. Sergeant Estes, who was moving a vehicle at the time, should have helped Chief Brown engage Mr. Bailey and stop him from entering the vehicle. Finally, Trooper Parks should have known a passenger was in the vehicle. These glaring mistakes should not be ignored when looking into this shooting. They directly led to the death of Amber Fagree. In my opinion, both Amber and Cadhar would still be alive today if Lieutenant Scott Ireland had simply followed standard police protocol and used his cell phone or police radio to ask another officer to investigate his neighbor's house. This mistake led to both deaths, in my opinion. I endeavored to research this shooting with an open mind and let the facts guide me. It is not easy to break through the blue wall of silence after a police shooting, and I knew that I would have to take an unconventional approach to getting information. I attempted several Freedom of Information requests. However, they were pointless. I received responses that, quote, "We cannot release information about an ongoing investigation," end quote. So, I used the only tool available to me, social media. I formed educated theories about the shooting and posted them on social media in the hope people would contact me with information to prove my theory was true or false. I have used this technique in the past, and it is a well-established lead-generating investigative method used by police and investigators for many years now. I noticed the police were not admitting that Lieutenant Ireland lived next to where the shooting happened, so I posted to social media that it happened right outside Lieutenant Ireland's house. I received credible information that I was right and confirmed via online searches that he did indeed live on Arnold Road, the road where the shooting took place. The police later confirmed to me the shooting happened a half a mile from Lieutenant Ireland's house. I assumed Lieutenant Ireland was off duty at the time of the shooting and noticed the police and news were not telling people that, so I posted to social media that Lieutenant Ireland was off duty and possibly drinking. Many cops are drinking after a long shift. Lieutenant Ireland is most likely of Irish heritage, and that seems to be a reasonable question to ask. Was he drinking? The state police eventually confirmed that he was off duty, but denied he was drinking. In fact, they sent me an affidavit of Lieutenant Ireland stating that he has never drank alcohol in his entire life. But they also confirmed by omission that he was never given a scientific test for drugs or alcohol. They just took his word for it. This was a huge oversight by the investigators looking into the shooting. When a truck driver gets into a fender bender, he has his blood drawn and it's tested. A cop can kill someone and no scientific test is conducted. This should be heavily considered when judging how thorough an investigation was conducted into this shooting. I received pictures of the Dodge Durango Amber was riding in. Based on showing the pictures to other investigators with experience in bullet trajectory, I formed the opinion that Trooper Parks was not standing in front of the vehicle and should not have feared for his life when he fired the shot that killed Amber Fagree. The state police rejected this opinion and said that my trajectory analysis was faulty and that I was not a certified bullet trajectory expert. I did end up posting something on social media that was way off the mark. I assumed that Lieutenant Ireland had shot Amber Fagree. I was wrong about this and corrected myself immediately after learning that it was Trooper Parks who fired the shot that killed Amber. I posted a correction along with the entire Attorney General's report into the shooting. The report stated that Lieutenant Ireland fired the shot that killed Cadhar Bailey. This does not, however, release him from the mistakes he made that directly led to the unfortunate killing of Amber Fagree by Trooper Parks. Lieutenant Ireland has a long history of questionable behavior. I wrote an article about how he retaliated against me after I was charged with a crime and won in court. I was completely exonerated and Lieutenant Ireland could not handle that. So he and others retaliated against me by denying a professional license and contacting my largest client. I lost the client after they told them that I was under a, quote, investigation that is ongoing, end quote. This cost me a significant amount of revenue and my ability to grow my business. Lieutenant Ireland was also connected to a retaliation against Bobby Doyon and Catherine Bierman. Lieutenant Ireland was caught on a recorded telephone call threatening a man who goes by the alias Postal Front. I have been contacted by many other people who have told me similar stories. However, when I mentioned this history on social media, the Maine State Police initially responded by telling me that Lieutenant Ireland has, quote, no sustained, end quote, internal affairs complaints against him. When I challenged that assertion by telling them that I myself had made a complaint, they changed their answer to, quote, he has one complaint against him, end quote. How convenient. In the months following the killing of Amber Fagree and Kadhar Bailey, there was a lot of public interest in the case. I received many messages, phone calls, and social media comments from numerous people. I was inserting myself into the public conversation and asking people connected with the case to reach out to me. Most of my speculation and theories on the case were developed and tested on social media. I learned that Amber Fagree and Kadhar Bailey were most likely addicted to drugs and guessed that heavily influenced their actions. However, I could never understand how Amber Fagree died. I wrote on social media that I would eventually write an article about the shooting, but not until I had a better grasp on what actually happened that day. The Maine State Police accused me of being incompetent, immoral liar for posting about the shooting on social media, and said that my social media posts were equivalent to an investigative report that had the backing of the state of Massachusetts because I hold a private investigator license there. I am sorry to inform them, but social media posts are simply free speech made in a digital public square. I'm sorry that my free speech offended them, but it was that very free speech that helped me research and form opinions about the shooting. I now feel that I can write an article about the shooting, but I want to stress, if anything in this article is wrong, please contact me so that I can correct it. I want to end this article by saying that I strongly believe that mistakes were made by Lieutenant Ireland, Chief Brown, Sergeant Estes, and Trooper Parks that led to the death of Amber Fagree and Kadhar Bailey. These police professionals should have received sufficient training to avoid these glaring mistakes, and Amber and Kadhar should be alive today. Amber should not have been in the Dodge Durango when Kadhar Bailey returned from his crime spree. Amber Fagree's mother filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the state. However, it was dismissed by the judge. Sadly, justice for Amber Fagree is unlikely unless things change when it comes to police accountability in Maine. Second, I want to end this article by briefly discussing a curious consequence from my interest in this shooting. After I applied for a professional license, the Maine State Police took an interest in my social media comments about this shooting. They ended up denying my application based on my social media posts. I appealed the denial, and Judge Michaela Murphy of Kennebec County Superior Court reversed their decision by saying they could only deny me if I made comments on social media with malicious intent. So, the Maine State Police yet again denied me, stating that I made my social media comments with malicious intent. I have begun a new appeal and will post updates on social media. I would confidently say that I am being retaliated against by the Maine State Police for questioning a police-involved shooting. Rather than follow their oath to the Constitution and allow someone to critically question a controversial shooting on social media, the Maine State Police used their power to retaliate against me for daring to challenge them. This is exactly why our founders gave us the First Amendment. I will close this discussion with one question that needs to be answered. Why do you think the Maine State Police retaliated against me for looking into a controversial police-involved shooting? If anything in this article is wrong, please contact me at joshgray@nationalsi.com. That's my email address. And I will do further research and make the appropriate corrections. Also, I wanted to mention an update. In May 2020, Maine State Trooper George Loader filed a whistleblower complaint claiming that Lieutenant Scott Ireland and Lieutenant Michael Johnston retaliated against him for exposing illegal activity within the state of Maine. I'll put a link to that article that was in the Bangor Daily News in the description. Also, I'm going to add links to some related articles in the description about how the Maine State Police violated civil and human rights of a Massachusetts private investigator. I'll put a link to an article about how a second private investigator claims that the same Maine State Police violated his rights. I'll put an article about corruption exposed at the Maine State Police. I'll put a link to an article about She Said reveals corruption at Maine State Police. The story of Catherine Bierman. And I'll also add a few more links about how the state denied a PI license based on social media criticism of a state police lieutenant.
Now a police shooting in
Hello, I wanted to discuss an update in the Maine State Police whistleblower article that came out in the Bangor Daily News a few weeks ago, about a month ago. So basically, the gist of the whistleblower complaint was that there was a Maine State Police trooper who was assigned to an anti-terrorism task force where he worked directly with the FBI in Portland, Maine. And when he saw that a unit that was set up after 9/11 to investigate terrorism was being used to illegally spy on Maine citizens, he told his superiors that he thought the activity was illegal and that it was not right for them to spy on Maine citizens for doing perfectly legal activities such as buying and owning guns, protesting their government lawfully, and a few other things, including spying on a Jewish, I believe it was a Jewish summer camp on a lake up in Maine. Anyway, it was a pretty big story in the state of Maine about how a organization called the Fusion Center, which is part of the Maine State Police or the Department of Public Safety in Maine, but it's consists of, I think, 4 or 5 sworn Maine State troopers, sworn police officers, and then I think 4 non-sworn people work there, civilian people. The whistleblower thought that it was weird, or I guess I'm speculating a little, but his whistleblower complaint was that basically the Fusion Center, that was set up in the wake of 9/11 to coordinate communications between law enforcement agencies to help stop terrorism, was now being used to spy on Maine citizens for doing perfectly legal activities, but that the state of Maine wanted to create a database and keep track of people that were buying guns, people that were protesting against, in some cases, the state of Maine, and then minority organizations that maybe they didn't like that much, which, I mean, that is just scary stuff. All 3 of those reasons are just scary stuff. Anyway, an article, by way of an update, an article came out in the Bangor Daily News recently. And this article said, hundreds of records hacked from Maine Intelligence Agency. That's the title of the article. It's written by Michael Shepard, Josh Keefe, Callie Ferguson, and Aaron Rhoda. They all contributed to this article. Again, hundreds of records hacked from Maine Intelligence Agency, which is this Fusion Center that the whistleblower complaint was talking about. So the article starts out, hundreds of documents from the Maine State Police unit at the center of the bombshell lawsuit have been published online as part of a wider hacking of U.S. law enforcement agencies, revealing sensitive information about potential victims and suspects of crime in the state. The Maine specific documents originated from the Maine Information Analysis Center, the secret intelligence agency run by the state police and the Maine Emergency Management Agency that is at the center of a May whistleblower lawsuit from a state trooper who alleges the center has been illegally spying on residents. The documents shed little light on those allegations and seem mostly show interactions with outside agencies, while they include requests for help from agencies on investigations and reveal how the unit tracks events protected by the First Amendment. They do not disclose data gathering techniques or internal communications such as emails between the center and staff, or between the center staff. Last week, an activist group that publishes leaks online released more than 1 million files stolen from police departments across the country. The group, called Disturbed Denial of Secrets, published 269 gigabytes of internal police documents, including about 5 gigabytes of information apparently hacked from the Maine Information and Analysis Center. The founder of the group that published the leak, Emma Best, told Wired that the files come from Anonymous, a loosely organized hacktivist group known for cyber attacks against governments, corporations, and other institutions. Best told the magazine that none of the files appear to be classified and may not show police acting illegally, but instead reveal controversial practices and the tone of police discussions. The Maine Information Analysis Center, a so-called fusion center, collects analysis and shares intelligence between the federal government and state and local agency. It also provides analytical support for crimes of a complex or statewide nature. It is unclear how the documents were stored and how they were hacked, but it appears they were obtained through a website developer vendor used by the Fusion Center since 2017. The hacked Maine documents are dated from 2017 to as recently as this month. Nets Essential, a company that provides third-party web hosting services to more than 200 law enforcement and government agencies throughout the country, first notified the Fusion Center of a data breach on June 20, according to a statement from the Maine State Police. Since then, the center has been assessing the extent of the data breach with local, state, and federal partners, including the FBI Houston Field Office, which is investigating. On Friday, the center learned that data sets submitted by partner organizations and maintained by Netsential were made public through various unlawful means, according to the statement from the state police. We will be engaging in additional, more specific notifications to those agencies affected as we learn what the contents of those breaches are to ensure that ongoing investigations are not jeopardized, the state police said. In addition to being the subject of the federal whistleblower lawsuit from Maine State Trooper George Loader, alleging police illegally collected personal data on gun owners, protesters, and counselors at the International Camp for Arab and Israeli Teens, the Fusion Center was also the subject of a legislative hearing on Wednesday where lawmakers questioned how it holds itself accountable or keeps Maine people safe. Top legislators have criticized the unit. A Representative Charlotte Webb, Democrat of Hollowell, the co-chair of the committee overseeing police, said Friday that she had read about the hack and that it would be raised in another hearing with law enforcement officials to be scheduled within a month. The news arm of the liberal Maine People's Alliance first reported on the Maine-specific document leak Friday. If you're a data collection organization and you can't protect your data, I think you are probably not worth Maine taxpayers' money, she said. The leaked documents show that the center was closely watching the recent Maine protests over racism and police brutality as part of a civil unrest daily report. The center listed locations, dates, times, and expected attendance of upcoming Black Lives Matter protests. It also noted the tactics and techniques of recent protesters, such as how they prepared gallons of milk, presumably to aid in exposure to tear gas, lit fireworks, presumably to gauge police reaction, but possibly to agitate the crowd, and repeated taunting and insulting statements toward law enforcement. When asked during Wednesday's legislative hearing why law enforcement officials would have an interest in lawful protests and gatherings protected under the First Amendment, Maine Department of Public Safety Commissioner Michael Soschuk said it was so police could help people assemble safely, not snoop on them. This is what we need to do to make sure we have enough staffing to make sure that people are safe, he said. The leak also contains information that could have serious consequences for people's personal lives, given that it appears to reveal details about ongoing investigations, name suspects who may have never been charged with crime, provide identity information about victims of abuse, and name overdose victims. It shows the request made by police departments, sheriff's offices, state police, the Maine Attorney General's office, and some federal law enforcement agencies to help gathering information on suspects and crimes. One request shows authorities are investigating a suspect in an unsolved southern Maine murder from the early 1990s. A Fusion Center document includes the suspect's name, his city of residence, and his social security number. Another shows police attempting to construct a roster of motorcycle club members. The requests include criminal history of suspects from other states, requests for help determining the owner of certain phone numbers, and general information about the whereabouts of suspects in investigations. Files show the contents of cell phones searched by police, including text messages, photos, and internet browsing histories. The leak also contains tips from the public, including screenshots of violent threats made on social media. During Wednesday's hearing, Representative Rachel Talbot Ross, Democrat Portland, expressed concern about whether soliciting tips from the public encouraged people to spy on one another, noting how reports of suspicious activity could unfairly target certain groups of people, especially black people. Some of the hacked files appear to highlight that tension over how proactive law enforcement should be in monitoring the potential for violence while respecting free speech and privacy. In one case, a person contacted the Fusion Center with concerns about the radicalization of the white nationalist organization New Albion, formed by former Jackman town manager Tom Kaczynski, I guess. Ultimately, do I think these folks just need a hug and to be more involved in their community to get out of their fear-induced anxiety spiral? Yes, said the December 2019 tip from a private citizen monitoring the group's social media activity. But they also advocate for arming themselves, and they're creating this ideology around it. Yeah, that's the end of the article. The Fusion Center has been doing some pretty shady things, including keeping an eye on perfectly legal protests. I mean, none of these protests that they are talking about here with Black Lives Matter or the recent protests about police accountability ever turned violent in the state of Maine. There was no violence. There was nationwide in other areas, but not in Maine. And then I think that I should add to this article, because when I learned about this, I have been sort of keeping something back that I haven't been telling people about. But recently, I applied for a professional investigator license in the state of Maine. I'm a licensed investigator already in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Tennessee, and I have held previously licenses in New Jersey and New York, although I don't work there anymore, so I let those expire. But to complete sort of my northern New England territory, I wanted to get licensed in Maine. So I applied for a private investigator license in January of 2018. Now, to give you a little bit more history on this, I also applied way back in 2012. Both times the license was denied. In 2012 it was denied because they accused me of working in Maine without a valid private investigator license. That they charged me with a crime. I went to court. The judge wouldn't even hear the case. He threw it out because the allegation was not true. I was not working in Maine without a license. I was doing training of a licensed Maine investigator. But that whole thing concluded in February of 2015. So, tying into this story, between February of 2015 to January of 2018, I had no active private investigation license going, none at all. And so you would think that between February 2015 to January 2018, the Maine State Police would take no interest in me whatsoever at all. I'm not a criminal, I'm just a private investigator. I don't have an active private investigation license being processed at all. After February 2015, nothing. But just a few short months after February 2015, in June of 2015, they started collecting information on me, the Maine State Police. And they collected this information for at least 6 months. I can show you all the documents that they collected. There's quite a bit of them. It's my social media documents, articles I wrote, basically exactly what the whistleblower said they were collecting. I was a peaceful protester about police corruption based on my experience in Maine, and I was writing articles, posting on social media, and posting on different other various websites. Well, between June 2015 and 2017, which is about a 6-month period, they were collecting all sorts of information on me. And they had no legal reason to be collecting this information. I wasn't being investigated for a crime. I didn't have an active application with them for a private investigator license. So why were they collecting information about me from June 2015 to early 2017? Why? I can't come up with an answer. In fact, I would have never known that they were collecting this information, except when I did reapply in January of 2018 for a private investigator license, when after taking nearly 10 months to process that application, in October 2018, they deny my application again, and they deny me based on social media posts that I made, so they continued to monitor my social media posts. But in the discovery materials that they had to give me when I appealed that denial is an entire packet of information that they collected prior to even submitting the application from June of 2015 through early 2017, when I wasn't being investigated for a crime, I didn't have an active application out there, and there was absolutely no reason for them to be looking into me or spying on me. So that information was collected illegally, just like the whistleblower said. For them to be collecting that information and storing it in their Fusion Center database, which is exactly what the whistleblower said they were doing, is very disturbing, because I'm not a terrorist. The Fusion Center was set up to investigate terrorism. I'm not an agitator. I've never once gone to a protest. I'm not somebody who is trying to do anything illegal. I'm a private investigator. If I did anything illegal, I'd lose my entire career. They have no reason whatsoever at all to collect this information on me. But yet they did. Why did they collect information on me? Exactly what George Loader said was going on. It happened to me, and it happened to lots of other people. This is highly disturbing stuff. An organization set up by our government to investigate terrorism is now being used to investigate law-abiding citizens that are simply protesting government corruption. If that doesn't disturb you, I don't know what will. Thanks for watching my video. Please comment. Let me know what you think. I know that I'm going to be posting this in a time when there's a lot of police can do no wrong trolls and activists on social media that are trying to counter the narrative of the Black Lives Matter and that all police are bad. I want to go on the record and say I don't think all police are bad. I think the majority of police officers in our country are good, hardworking people. They do an amazing job under some of the most difficult circumstances. I, myself, am pro-police. I believe in police. I don't believe in defunding them. I don't think all cops are bad. In fact, in my career, I deal with police all the time, and in my 18 plus years as a private investigator, I can only think of a handful of cops that I know in my heart of hearts are dirty. Just a handful. And I'm going to tell you right now, 2 of them run the Maine Fusion Center. I think one was transferred, so he doesn't run it anymore. But their names are Lieutenant Scott Ireland and Lieutenant Michael Johnston. Those are, in my opinion, the dirtiest cops I've ever run into in my entire career. And I'm somebody who deals with cops all the time. I deal with them all the time. I know in my heart of hearts, Lieutenant Ireland and Michael Johnston are dirty, 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 and the people of Maine are in danger every minute they remain employed as police officers. I'm so passionate about that. I'm so sorry for you people up in Maine. I'm a Mainer. I grew up in Maine, born and raised, but now I've been exiled to Boston, which is fine. I love Boston. I love Massachusetts. I'd love to return to Maine. I really would. But because I'm critical of these dirty cops and I warn about them, and I have warned about them for ever since they denied me in 2012 or 2013, 14, whenever it was, for a made-up bogus charge. I knew they were dirty, and so I went on social media and I warned the world that they were dirty. And they retaliated. And they retaliated again. And they contacted my client and told them I was under an ongoing investigation. I lost the client. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. I warned that they were powder kegs and they're going to kill somebody, and then they kill somebody. So I look into that shooting, and they retaliated against me again. They deny my license again, this time based on social media posts. Social media posts. I'm so scared and afraid for myself, for the people of Maine, that you have these corrupt and dirty cops in positions of power. Again, it's my opinion that they're corrupt and dirty, but I think I've posted over the years some pretty good evidence. In fact, I'm going to make a video soon and write an article about what I said on social media that they didn't use against me when I applied for a professional license. Because I've said a lot of things on social media, and they scoured through all of my social media, and they found a few things that I said that were turned out to not be true. I corrected myself, so anything I said that wasn't true, I corrected prior to them denying me. So even though I had corrected, they still used statements that I had corrected, keep in mind, against me. I can't believe it happened. Actually, I can believe it happened. In fact, I predicted it would happen. I predicted it would happen. When I submitted my application in January 2018, the very next day I posted on social media, I can't wait to find out how they deny me this time. I hope they don't make up another false charge against me. I predicted it would happen, and it did happen. And you know, I'm not a prophet, but when you know you're dealing with dirty cops, you can make predictions like that, and they will come true. Please comment on this. Please let me know your thoughts. There have been too many things going on up in Maine that need to change. And it's not going to change unless you do something about it. It's not going to change if you just sit on your couch or you passively watch a YouTube video like this. You need to write a comment. You need to hit the like button. You need to send an email to your politicians. Nothing changes until you do something. There's a saying that I like. My mother has it on her voicemail. Be the change you want to see in the world. I want police to be accountable for their actions when they do wrong. I support cops. I support all police officers that are good, honest, hardworking. I do not support corrupt and dirty cops. And in my opinion, Lieutenant Ireland, Sergeant Johnston, and I dare say Colonel John Cody of the Maine State Police. I only throw him in there. I don't know much about him. I only throw him in there because he's the one that signed the denial letter. Those are dirty cops. Those are the bad apples we need thrown out of our police department. Not all cops, just the bad ones. Thanks for watching. So, thanks for joining my live stream tonight. I haven't done a lot of it live. A lot of it's been pre-recorded videos. But there's one story that I wanted to cover, and I'm going to make a video about this and post it either tomorrow or maybe even later tonight. But I figured I would just cover it right now with you. And I did get a comment from Kyle. He said, good stuff. Hope your career hasn't taken a hit from everything. Good info. I appreciate that comment. I just keep going. I just keep moving forward. That's all you can do when you're dealing with stuff like this. When you run into a wall of corruption, you just take it one day at a time, one step at a time, and you just hope that it all works out. There's a lot of hopeful optimism that's involved with trying to make it through living through a nightmare. But it's just what we do. But this is a case from Maine about Albert Flick, and as far as I can tell, nobody has been punished. Nobody has been held accountable for this in the state of Maine. But basically what happened was a 77-year-old was freed from prison because a judge considered that he was too old to be a threat. And let's just read through this article together. A 77-year-old inmate in the Maine prison system was deemed too old to be a threat and who was freed from prison after serving 25 years for murdering his wife, has been jailed for a second time for killing another woman in an identical fashion. Albert Flick, 77, was sentenced to 25 years in prison in 1979 after stabbing his wife 14 times in front of their daughter. He was released after 25 years in 2004, but went back to prison or to jail in 2010 for assaulting another woman. And here he is right here. This is a picture of him. Obviously, he's 7 there, and he's older there. In 2014, he was released because he was deemed too old to be a threat. Last year, he stabbed a homeless 48-year-old mother 11 times in broad daylight in Lewiston, Maine, in front of her children after stalking her for days. The caption under this photo of him is, so Albert Flick, 77, is shown on Monday at his trial in Auburn, Maine. He was convicted of murder on Wednesday, his second murder conviction after killing his wife in 1979. And that's a picture of his wife and child. 1979, Flick killed his wife Sandra in front of their daughter, above together in this picture, by stabbing her 14 times. Wow. 2018, he struck again, killing 48-year-old Kimberly Dobby, a homeless mother who he had become infatuated with. Wow. He was convicted of murder on Wednesday and is yet to be sentenced, but will likely now spend the rest of his life in prison. Thank goodness. Assistant Attorney General Bud Ellis told jurors in his closing argument that Flick knew Debbie was going to be leaving town and thought to himself, if I can't have her, I will kill her. In the days before the murder, he trailed her and her children around the town where they were living, to Dunkin' Donuts, a local library, and to the bus shelter. Among those who testified were friends of the woman who said that she tolerated his affection but did not want it. And this is a picture from a security camera showing him right before the murder. Flick is shown moments before the murder in 2018 as he waited for a moment to strike outside a laundromat in Lewiston, Maine. Alan Labozo, his defense attorney, said there had been no indication his client posed a threat. Dobby's injuries were severe. She was stabbed so many times that it pierced her heart and her lung. Her 11-year-old twin sons witnessed the killing, and it was also caught on surveillance cameras. There he is in court. Flick listening to the guilty verdict through headphones because he is so hard of hearing. He is shown standing next to his attorney, Alan Labozo. Wow, what a scumbag this guy is. The jury, from his most recent trial, were not told about his previous crimes, but they took only 40 minutes to find him guilty. The elderly man said nothing throughout the trial. He had to listen through headphones to the verdict, though it is not known why. 2 days before the killing, he bought a pair of knives from Walmart. He then waited on the day of the murder until the sidewalk was clear of pedestrians to attack her. She was sitting on a step outside a building, talking on her cell phone at the time. Prosecutors described how he was seen walking up to her, reaching into the small of his back and retrieving the knife, and then plunging it into her body without warning as her children watched. The attack was intervened by a witness who testified at the trial that he drop-kicked Flick and kept his foot on his neck until police arrived. The stabbing was caught on this surveillance camera at the laundromat. You can see the EMTs coming to try to save her, but obviously they couldn't. He said he heard Dobby telling the older man to leave her alone beforehand. Flick never offered an explanation for the killing. He submitted a not guilty by way of insanity plea before the trial began, but withdrew it. He will be sentenced in August and faces life behind bars. Maine does not have the death penalty. His daughter, with the wife he murdered, is now an adult. She said of the second killing that the judge who released him from prison should be forced to explain to the woman's sons why she no longer is alive. The boys are the ones that are going to live with it. I think the judge should explain to them, tell them how come they had to watch their mother be slaughtered on the street, she told. Good point. And I've done a little bit of research, and as far as I can tell, nobody has been held accountable. The judge that released him, the prosecutors, nobody. Once again, the state of Maine screws up, and nobody's held accountable for it. This is a disgrace. Maine man who killed woman in front of her children is sentenced to life. This is after the sentencing hearing. A Maine man convicted of stabbing a woman to death in front of her twin boys was sentenced to life in prison on Friday. In July, a jury found Albert Flick guilty of murder for stabbing 48-year-old Kimberly Dobby to death in July 2018 outside Rancourt's laundromat in Lewiston. It took a jury less than an hour to find the 77-year-old guilty. Flick was seen on surveillance video just before prosecutors said he stabbed Dobby. Police said bystanders tackled him as he stabbed Dobby multiple times. There was also video evidence of Flick purchasing 2 knives days before the stabbing. The judge said Friday Flick lacked remorse and that he even looked at Dobby's twin boys during the stabbing and then continued. 3 victim impact statements were read aloud in court Friday, 2 of them from friends of Dobby, and the third was read by a victim advocate on Dobby's mother Susan's behalf. I'm glad he'll be going away for the rest of his life. I'm glad to know he'll be dying in prison, said Laura Kirkland, a friend of Dobby's. This was the second murder conviction for Flick. He was also convicted in 1979 of stabbing his wife Sandra 14 times in front of their child. He served 21 years of a 30-year sentence. He was released in 2000. One of Dobby's friends, Lori Moreau, said he is a monster and he shouldn't have ever been released from prison. He should never even been let out in the first place. If they would have kept him in there, she would still be alive and the boys would still have their mom, Moreau said. The judge did ask if Flick would like to say anything. He shook his head and said no. He was then taken back to prison following the sentence. Also, I wanted to play this video. Let's see if I can find it.
Man found guilty of a deadly stabbing outside of a Lewiston laundromat last year has been sentenced to life in prison. CBS 13's Lauren Healy was inside the courtroom when friends of the victim spoke to the judge.
Before the judge handed down that life sentence, we heard from 2 of Kimberly Dobby's friends. They say they're happy Albert Flick will spend the rest of his life in prison.
I'm glad he'll be going away for the rest of his life. I'm glad to know he'll be dying in prison.
Today, the judge said he lacked remorse and that he even looked back at Dobby's twin boys during the stabbing and then continued on. In court, one of Dobby's friends says he is a monster and he shouldn't have even been out of prison. Flick stabbed his wife Sandra to death in 1979 in front of their child.
He should have never been let out in the first place. If they would have kept him there, Kim would still be alive. And the boys would still have their mom.
Another friend who lived in the homeless shelter with Dobby says this was a difficult day for Dobby's mother, who wasn't able to be in court, but is now caring for her daughter's 2 twin boys.
It was Sunday.
Laura Kirkland will never forget that Sunday.
They were going to go do laundry.
The morning she had breakfast with her friend Kim Dobby and her twin boys at Hope Haven in Lewiston. By that afternoon, her friend was dead.
I was expecting to go visit her. I said, what hospital is she in? That's when she said she's dead.
Dobby died after being stabbed repeatedly outside this Lewiston laundromat. Surveillance video rolling as her twin boys rushed to her side. Prosecutors say the man who killed her, Albert Flick, was obsessed and, surprising to many, he had murdered before.
His criminal record, including the murder of his first wife in 1979. Sandra Flick had served her husband divorce papers that January. A month later, her daughter watched as Albert Flick stabbed her mother with a knife.
I don't think anyone saw him as a threat.
Dobby had just learned she was moving to Farmington. Flick was not part of her plans.
When he found out I think that's when he started plotting.
At some point, Mr. Flick is going to age out of his capacity to engage in this conduct.
That's retired Cumberland County Superior Court Judge Robert Crowley at a June 2010 sentencing. Flick was in trouble again after threatening a woman with a kitchen knife.
There's absolutely nothing in Mr. Flick's past history that suggests that he is going to choose to abandon his behaviors of assaultive conduct toward women.
In fact, his criminal history goes even further. Records show in addition to his first murder conviction, Flick was convicted for criminal threatening, assault, violating condition of release, and tampering with a witness, all before that 2010 court session, which you're hearing now. A Cumberland County prosecutor tells the judge Flick is a danger and deserves a lengthy time in prison.
I know that the defendant is an older man, and that the court and society may think that this individual is going to stop committing crimes, but his history has really shown that he's just not about to do that.
But the judge, again hearing the case for criminal threatening and knowing Flick killed his first wife, disagreed, sentencing him to 4 years.
The fact of the date of his birth, he will be 72 or 73 when released from the probation revocation. At some point, Mr. Flick is going to age out of his capacity to engage in this conduct.
That judge adding it didn't make sense from a criminal law or financial standpoint to house a man in his 70s in prison.
I can't say that I've ever actually heard somebody aging out of violence.
Jonathan Sarbeck is the Cumberland County District Attorney.
When you're given someone's criminal history and it says murder on it, shouldn't that be a red flag?
To me, that's a very big red flag.
We now know Flick did not age out, and at 76, he killed again. He's now in prison for the rest of his life.
Unless there's a mandatory minimum, judges have all the discretion that they want when it comes to the decisions that they make.
He was that good.
Kirkland says they didn't even know Flick posed a threat, let alone the fact he murdered his wife.
All I saw was a lonely old man, and he certainly didn't look intimidating.
That's why she's now advocating for a free way to look up criminal histories like murder convictions. She says if she knew about Flick's past, her friend Kim Doby would be alive today.
I'm just glad I got to hug her that morning.
Flick refused to comment on this story after we reached him through his probation officer. The judge from the 2010 hearing also didn't want to say anything. The judicial branch and the AG's office also wouldn't answer our questions either. Doby's friends are now hoping her death prompts some good by pushing lawmakers for that state registry.
You notice how the entire state of Maine just goes completely mute. They don't say anything. They're silent. Even when reporters are trying to contact them to get answers about what happened here, find out if anybody was punished for this, find out if that judge was held accountable for letting this guy out. This is the problem in Maine. They hide behind secrecy, walls of secrecy that they put up. They actually write secrecy right into their laws, even though they don't put consequences for breaking that secrecy. They hide behind that secrecy when they want to. For example, in some cases, they say, we can't talk about that because it's an unfolding investigation or because it's been sealed by the court. But then, an identical case where it kind of works in their favor, they will talk about. They'll release 911 calls on cases they like. They'll hide 911 calls on cases they don't like. The same with dash cam footage. And there's no accountability for public officials in the state of Maine, including judges. And this judge, I'm not sure he should, lose his job as a judge, but he should be held accountable. There should be some sort of sanction for letting this guy out. This is a little bit more different case than what I normally cover, because at least the prosecutors did try to keep him behind bars. I'm not sure how much they really objected to the judge, but at least there was some sort of effort to keep him behind bars. But I mean, did you hear the reasoning of the judge? We don't want to be housing a 75-year-old man in our prison system, even though a jury convicted him to a 30-year sentence. We're going to go ahead and let him out after 20 years. I mean, There does need to be some accountability here. But let's look at another story about this case, and then I'll close down this live stream. I got a comment here. Stay safe, dude. You're doing great work, from Juan Vasquez. Thank you. Appreciate that. This was so preventable. Convicted killer who judge said would age out of violence kills again. A Maine judge said a convicted murderer would age out of committing violence against women, but a few years later he killed a mother in front of her children, her twin boys actually, again. Albert Flick, now 78, murdered his wife Sandra Flick in 1979. In 2018, Flick murdered Kimberly Dobby, 48, while she took a phone call outside a Lewiston laundromat. I've never seen anyone with that much energy in my life, Dobby's friend Laura Kirkland said about her friend Dobby. Kirkland and Dobby met while both spent time at the Hope Havel Gospel Mission, a homeless shelter in Lewiston, Maine. The two had breakfast with Dobby's twin 11-year-old boys the morning Flick stalked and then killed Dobby. They were going to go to the laundromat, Kirkland said. I'm just glad I got to hug her that morning. That would be the last time Kirkland saw her friend alive. And there's a picture. I'm not sure if this picture was taken the day of the murder, because she is sort of at a diner right here. I have a connection to Lewiston too. My parents own a house there. My family farm is located in Minot, which is right just a town over, 2 towns over from Lewiston. Flick stabbed Dobby at least 11 times outside Rancourt's laundromat on Sabata Street. And for those that know about the Lewiston-Auburn area, Sabata Street is, at least when I was living in Maine, Sabata Street in Lewiston was kind of known as not a good area. Surveillance video shows Dobby walking out of the laundry with a phone to her ear. A few minutes later, Flick is seen pacing outside the laundromat. At some point, Mr. Flick is going to... the video then shows Dobby's boys rushing to her side. Police said a babysitter held Flick down until police arrived. There's the surveillance, pictures from the surveillance camera. There's Dobby on the phone right before she is going to be killed. There's Flick walking up to her. Flick was taken to the hospital after the stabbing, and upon his release was arrested and charged with murder, his second murder charge on a long criminal record. He was trying to get away with anything, Kirkland said. He did it in broad daylight, in front of dozens of witnesses, and in front of her children. The first murder, Flick murdered a mother in front of a child before. Sandra Flick served her husband divorce papers in January 1979 and had him physically escorted from their apartment in Westbrook by the police. Westbrook is a suburb of Portland, Maine, Portland is the biggest city in Maine. A narrative from the Maine Supreme Judicial Court said, the state Supreme Court heard an appeal in 1981 challenging Flick's conviction. The appeal was denied. According to the narrative, Sandra Flick's daughter from a prior marriage, Elsie Kimball, watched as Albert Flick stabbed her mother with a knife. Sandra Clement. According to the narrative, Sandra Flick's daughter from a prior marriage, Elsie Kimball, watched... Oh yeah, that's written twice. Wow. Flick took out his knife and began showing Sandra how to remove the hooks from the fishing lines, the narrative says. The daughter testified that her mother bent over one of the poles to take one of the hooks off as Flick was telling her to do so. Then Flick seized her arms and bent it behind her back, putting his other hand over her mouth. A neighbor called police and met Flick coming down the stairs with blood on his hands and bloodstains on his pants. Flick served prison time but was released sometime before 2007 when state records indicate he was arrested in Portland for assault. This exact release date is unknown, but according to a court narrative, Flick was released sometime in the early 2000s. He offended again in 2007. I don't think anyone saw him as a threat, Kirkland said. Kirkland knew Flick, too. She saw him frequently at the Lewiston Public Library, where she said he would play puzzles. The library is also where he often saw Dobby with her boys and her friends. He told me, probably about a month after Kim got there, that he saw her and he was blown away by her beauty, Kirkland said. A few days before the murder, Dobby learned she would be moving to Farmington. Flick was not part of her plan. When he found out, I think that's when he started plotting, Kirkland said. Kirkland wishes she knew about Flick's criminal past, that a convicted murderer was sharing a table with her at the library. His criminal record includes convictions for criminal threatening, assaulting, violating conditions of release, and tampering with a witness, in addition to the 1979 murder conviction of his wife. In 2010, Flick sat in front of now-retired Cumberland County Superior Court Judge Robert Crowley, so he's retired, on a charge of domestic-related assault and criminal threatening with a dangerous weapon. According to the 2010 report from the Portland Police Department, Flick placed his victim in a headlock and stabbed her with the handle of a steak knife several times. His victim was, again, a woman he knew. There's absolutely nothing in Mr. Flick's past history that suggests he is going to choose to abandon his behaviors of assaultive conduct toward women, Crowley said in part of the 18-minute-long sentencing hearing. WMTV W News 8 obtained the transcript and audio recording as part of the public records request. However, from his appearance and the fact that the date of his birth, he will be 72 or 73 when released from the probation revocation, and as with the earlier defendant, at some point Mr. Flick is going to age out of his capacity to engage in this conduct, end quote. That's what the judge said. The hearing also included statements from Assistant District Attorney Catherine Tierney and Flick's probation officer, Troy Thornton. Flick, then in his late 60s, and his attorney were also present. Tierney, laying out Flick's long criminal record, recommended Flick go to prison for 8 years. I know that the defendant is an older man, quote, I know that the defendant is an older man and that the court and society may think that this individual is going to stop committing crimes, especially crimes against women and violent crimes against women with a weapon. But his history has really shown that he's just not about to do that, she said. I think there is a huge safety risk to women and society when it comes to Mr. Flick, and I would ask that the court impose the full revocation followed by a consecutive 4-year sentence, she said. There's no, Albert Flick with his lawyer in court, quote, there's no better predictor for future behavior than past behavior, Thornton said. He's an extremely violent individual when it comes to relationships. He doesn't appear to have slowed down at this point, and I don't see him slowing down in the near future, end quote. Crowley sentenced Flick to nearly 4 years in prison, adding it did not make sense for a criminal or financial from a criminal or financial standpoint to incarcerate Flick into his 70s. He was released in 2014 at the age of 72. I can't say I've actually ever heard of somebody aging out of violence, said Cumberland County District Attorney Jonathan, who was elected in 2018. When you're given someone's criminal history and it says, quote, murder on it, shouldn't that be a red flag? WMTW News 8 David Carnes asked Sharbeck. When you have a probation officer saying this person is going to be violent, it's a very big red flag to a court, Sharbeck said. Unless there's a mandatory minimum, judges have all the discretion they want to the decisions that they make. Sharbeck called Dobby's murder disturbing, and her friends and family say it was avoidable. I would have to agree with that. In 2017, a study of federal inmates found 13% of offenders 65 and older reoffend. Just 4% of those in the same age group are reincarcerated. All I saw was a lonely man, Kirkland said, thinking back to seeing Flick at the library. He certainly didn't look intimidating. Kirkland is now advocating for a free way to look up criminal histories, like murder convictions. She said if she had known about Flick's past, Dobby would be alive today. The Maine State Bureau of Identification offers a paid service to look up criminal history. In addition to a person's name, one requesting a search must also provide a date of birth. This was so preventable, and hindsight's 2020, but this is the hardest way to learn that this needs to be done now, Kirkland said. It took a jury less than an hour to convict Flick for Dobby's murder. A judge sentenced him to life in prison. Of course, Maine does not have the death penalty, so he couldn't get that. Albert Flick's booking photo from the Maine State Prison, a law sponsored by Senate Democrats and signed into law in 2018 by former Republican Governor Paul LePage, adds domestic violence as an aggravating factor in sentencing on a murder charge, effectively lengthening the 25-year to life minimum sentence required by state law. Crowley did not respond to a request for comment. They also reached out to the judicial branch for comment, but they didn't get any comment from the Attorney General, the judge, everybody declined to comment in this case. So once again, we have a case in Maine where the state completely screws up and nobody is punished. This judge was able to just retire. I don't think it was a forced retire. I think it was just the judge retired, and there was no consequence to the judge. There was no consequence to the district attorney. There was no consequence to anybody. This is not as clear-cut because in this case, the district attorney did at least try to keep him in prison. But again, it didn't happen. Let me know what your thoughts are about this particular case. Please keep the conversation going in the comment section. Share this video. Hit the like button. Subscribe to my channel. I'm almost over 21,000 subscribers. It would be great to get over 21,000 soon. And I appreciate you watching. I'd like to give a shout out to the Maine Fusion Center, a secret Maine State Police Department set up in the wake of 9/11 to spy on terrorists, but now spy on anybody who's a little critical of the state of Maine. They have spied on me, they've spied on peaceful protesters, they've spied on people that were against a power line going through Maine, they've spied on Black Lives Matter protesters, and they are my most loyal fan. They've watched all my videos, read all my posts, so a big shout out to the Maine State Police Fusion Center. These videos do take a lot of time. I don't make money on them, so if you would not mind, go check out my website, nationalsi.com, and if you know anybody who does insurance fraud assignments, insurance adjusters, lawyers, please email me their contact information so that I can reach out to them. I'm in the New England area. I'm licensed in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont. I work in Rhode Island, and also I'm down in the South too, in Tennessee. So any of those areas are great. If you know people that are in the industry, please forward their information. It would be very, very helpful. Also check out my store. You can buy cool t-shirts and mugs and different things that help support my work. I just want to get to the truth. That's my goal with every case, with every story that I do, and the truth and uncovering the truth is very important, no matter where it leads.
Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also.